I'm Duane Baxter. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio. I lived in Cleveland until I was 4 years old, and then I moved to a suburb. It was Fairview Village. It's now been renamed Fairview Park. Okay, and when I was 12 years old, we moved to the farm, and at that time I was 6 miles from Michigan and 6 miles from Indiana. My grandfather had had a stroke, and my mother wanted to be near him. My father was a railway mail clerk, and he was able to switch runs from, and he formerly ran between Cleveland and Chicago, and then after we moved, he ran from Toledo to Elkhart, Indiana. So at the age of, I played football in high school, and a little small, but I was 165 pounds, and I played tackle. It gives you an idea what kind of team we had. However, we did win this. When I'm junior year, we won the conference championship, and my senior year, we tied for the conference championship. At the age of 18, I went to school, to college, at Ohio Wesleyan University, and I was there for 2 years. And in the summers, I worked on the railroad. In fact, in high school, I started working on the railroad. It was maintenance of way, which we called Yandy dancers. I don't know whether you understand the term or not, but it's an old term. Anyway, in 1948, I decided that things weren't going well, and I decided to join the Marine Corps. And I enlisted and went to Parris Island for boot training. One curious thing about boot training is I recall about the 12th, I think it was the 12th or 14th week, we were out at the rifle range, and I recall very vividly peeling the blisters off my hands. I was getting soft. And a lot of the guys were struggling, but I was in reasonably good shape. And then when I graduated from boot camp, I went to Norfolk, Virginia, or Portsmouth, Virginia, which is right across the river from each other. At Portsmouth, I trained to be what we called a seagoing Marine. Okay, and at the completion of the training, I took a short leave over New Year's, and when I got back, they assigned me to a ship in the South Boston Naval Shipyards in Boston. That ship moved all of 10 miles while I was on board. I was on board until from the end of January through the middle of April. And what we did on board the ship was prepare it for mothballing. And in order to do that, you had to scrape all the rust off the inner bottom. You know, there's major ships have two hulls. One is where the water's on the other side, and the other one has this crawl space in between. When we got the rust all scraped off, then we put not cosmoline, but a green-colored paint anyway. It gave off tremendously strong fumes. And I recall one time we were down there painting away, and we were equivalent to getting drunk, and we were throwing paint at each other. And there was a corporal upstairs, up at the top, and he was supposed to be. We were only supposed to stay down there for like 20 minutes, and he'd left us down there for over an hour. And the lieutenant came by and asked what's going on. He could hear us yelling and screaming down there, or not screaming, but making noise. And he says, "How long those guys been down there?" And he says, "About an hour." He says, "Get them out of there now." I don't think he had that job long after that. But anyway, from there, well, just before we left there, the sergeant major called me into the office and asked what I was planning on doing. And he said, when you get to Quantico, just keep your nose clean, don't get into any trouble, and then you put in for Great Lakes ET school. He says, you'll get it. Okay. So I went down to Quantico, Virginia, and Quantico has the best food you can ever ask for. It's an officers' training area, but they had about 200 men there whose job it was primarily to set up problems and stuff for the part of the officers' training, okay, so that they could see how to handle people and stuff like that. On Sunday morning, they always had a special breakfast. You'd go in there, and he had this big iron stove, and half the stove had on steaks, the other half had big slices of ham on it, and then he must have had 3 stoves because he was making eggs. And you'd walk up and he said, how many do you want and how do you want them? And he'd reach in and he could take 2 eggs in his hand, crack both of them, drop them on the thing and throw them in. And that was an outstanding breakfast because you could have steak, ham, and eggs for breakfast, which was a great thing to do at that time, at least for me anyway. Anyway, I was there for a couple of months, and I went up and saw the warrant officer, and he says, yeah, how'd you like to go to ET school at Great Lakes? And I says, that sounds good. So when I was getting ready to leave, he pulled out this notebook, and in the notebook he had a page for each of the ships that had been decommissioned, because there were several of them at the same time that I was. And on that page, he had listed the men that was on it and what school he had sent him to. He was sending him to the top schools that he could find in any of the military, because some of them went to tank schools and some of them went to mechanic schools where they fixed engines and trucks and stuff like that. And he says, you got to take a test, and we'll see if you can go to Great Lakes. So I took the test, and I know I flunked the test. I mean, I knew enough about electronics to know that I didn't know the answers to the questions. But come July, I was on my way to Great Lakes. And at Great Lakes, I went to ET school, electronics technician school, and I only had to repeat 2 weeks one time. And that's because I didn't understand tube theory. I couldn't understand how they worked. And finally, after the second week, I had a pretty good idea how they worked. So when that was over, this was in about the end of January in 1950. Well, I went to advanced radar school in San Diego. So when the Korean War broke out, I was in San Diego in the radar school, and I had just been assigned to take another 4 weeks for what they called moving target indicator. So I graduated from that school in the last of August of 1950. Well, in May, they had come around and asked us where we wanted to go when we graduated from school. Well, my home being in Ohio, I figured this is a free trip home, because I can, So anyway, the guys who asked for the East Coast went to the East Coast. The guys who asked for the West Coast, which was about 50-50 on the class, they went to Korea. Okay, well, when I got to Cherry Point, because I was assigned to the 2nd Air Wing, they had an operation going on at Camp Lejeune, which is, there's a large Marine Air Base at Cherry Point, hundreds of planes. Down in Lejeune, they had 4 Corsairs and a couple of Bell helicopters. That was the extent of the aircraft there. But they also had several radars. and one of the radars was a TPS-1B, and they wanted to install the moving target indicator on it. Well, in order to operate the moving target indicator, they had this little Hercules engine. It was a 4-cylinder engine. And I would get everything tuned up, and when everything tuned up, it used less power. When it used less power, the engine didn't keep up with it, and it would raise up, the voltage would go too high, and then everything would shut down, and sometimes it burned out the klystron tube. They had these, what we call lighthouse tubes in it, okay? And anyway, I was a corporal by this time, but I was working with a staff sergeant who was sent to a school in Brooklyn, and there he learned about the MPS 4, I think. Yeah, MPS 4. Anyway, when he came back, he was there for about 9 months and then got discharged, and I kind of replaced him. But anyway, we maintained the radar there, and our job was to train forward observers. And even though I never made it to Korea, the forward observers that we helped train through the fact that we kept the radars and stuff going probably accounted for about 10 to 20 times as much as the average guy on the ground did, because here he's calling in airstrikes. And at that time, you had to be an officer and a pilot in order to give a pilot directions. We had all of our air controllers in the problems we ran at Lejeune. We had a group of officers, and that's what they did. They were learning to be controllers, and these are the guys, when they got to Korea, that would be right on the front lines, and they were calling in airstrikes. And I always told people that, well, I didn't get to Korea, but I probably helped kill more North Koreans than by far the average did. But that's what I did there. And I was at Lejeune then until I got my discharge in 1952. The Korean War was winding down at the time, and I had been involuntarily extended, and the extension ran out on the 2nd of July. So my service record reads 3 years, 11 months, and 30 days. So I got out 1 day early. So that pretty well covers my career in the Marine Corps. After I got out, I went to Tri-State College in Angola, Indiana, which was about 20 miles from my home in Ohio. And I learned to be an electrical engineer while I was there. And I always tell people, you've heard the joke, there's a joke goes around that last week I couldn't spell engineer and now I are one. Well, I can't spell either. So anyway, I graduated from there in 1955, and the recruiting guy from IBM invited me to Kingston, New York, where they were setting up a military, well, if you ever heard of what they call the DEW line, the DEW line was across the northern part of the country, and it was designed to intercept the Russians should they attempt to fly into the United States. And I reasonably good at arithmetic, and I says, well, I got this plane flying at 2,000 miles an hour, and I pick him up 600 miles away, the earliest. Where's he going to be when it takes 20 minutes to scramble? Okay. He's already in and dropped his bombs before they got there. It was, to me, it was a stupid thing to do. the whole DEW line, the idea of it and everything, was a waste of money because there was no way it would have protected us, but it made people feel good, so I guess that was that was okay. Anyhow, after I went to work at IBM, I worked in Kingston for about 8 years, and mostly working on the XD1 and XD2 were the forerunners of the DEW line package, and then I was designing DC1 and on beyond that. And one of the interesting things about it was they had this call one time. There was a safety issue, and they had this deal. They were checking the insulation on wire, and they were putting 1,000 volts on it. And this guy was feeding this wire through this thing. Well, it was possible that he could have gotten a shock from 1,000 volts. Well, you get hit with 1,000 volts, you know it. And I had to redesign that so he wasn't in danger of getting hurt. And I also designed what they called a diode box tester, and they had different, in electronics, you have yes and no is the only things. Well, these diodes were set up so that they would pass a signal when the proper combination came up. They would pass a signal and tell people that something was going on. So after I finished there, I went to research. And in research, I worked with a Paul, and I can't remember his last name. But anyway, we worked on, the reason I got down there was they were building this machine to it was character recognition machine, okay? And they needed somebody that could do power supplies, among other things. But they brought me down there as a circuit designer, and I designed several circuits. And there was another guy came down there at the same time, and he was supposed to do the power supplies for him. Well, he worked about 6 months, and they weren't getting anything done. And the manager down there asked me if I could take a look at it. Well, 3 days later, they were on the air. It's a very simple thing to do. They were using commercial power supplies. And well, in addition to that, I built a display unit for them. Then after that, I went down to research well, anyway, eventually they sent me to Rochester, Minnesota. And my job out here was to get this character recognition machine working for the Social Security Administration. And we had a lot of fun doing that. Anyway, we did it. And when that was finished, then I took over the Advanced Technology Group. The guy who was my boss was sort of promoted out of the job, and he wound up working for the division president eventually. I never got any of that stuff, but I did become the technology manager. And as technology manager, I helped design the UPS code. And the UPS code is used all over the world now to identify. And one of the stupid things that they did is it's got 5 numbers on either side. Well, on the left, as you face the code, on your left-hand side, all those 5 characters, which have a tremendous number of combinations available, identify the manufacturer. They could have done it with 3 codes instead of. And on the right-hand side, is basically a part number, and that part number is used to identify what kind of groceries it is. Each digit has 10 different possibilities. There's like, I think it's 10 billion possible combinations in that, so they're not going to run out of numbers anytime soon. But anyway, I did work on that. I helped to specify the maximum or the minimum line width and the maximum line width. So one of the guys there was a guy by the name of Joe Fox, and in May of 1972, I went down to see what was going on. Well, he had this idea for a UPC code, but he was trying to sell what I called, or I think he called it, the bullseye code. Well, in order to scan a bullseye code, you have to go through the center. Well, when you're moving and you have to go through the center, it's almost impossible to hit the center. And I got back, talked to my boss, and he says, that code ain't going to work. So then we changed it to the code that you're working with now, the design of the code itself, and then there's a group in Poughkeepsie that actually came up with the coding, the line thickness and the spacing determine the characters on it, and that was done in Poughkeepsie. So that's a little known fact that Joe Fox touts as he's being the designer of the UPC code. He had nothing to do with that design. He wasn't even in the room. And Art Hamburg and I are the ones who designed that code. It's been, I don't know for what it's worth. Dick Tracy, who used to be the lab director in Rochester, knew who did it, and for years he said I should get out and tell people about it, and he passed away last year, so he won't be bothering me about it anymore. I never knew exactly what avenue to use to explain that to it. But other things that, I had a guy come in one time, he had this problem. We was trying to do a drop test. When you drop a box, how do you measure what's going on? Well, if you drop it from like 20 inches on, the only time you care about is that last couple millimeters. As the box touches the floor and does whatever it's going to do and only one corner. Well, I told them how to set up a laser so they could do that. And as far as I know, they're still using it. So I did that. And then I had a group of guys. At one time I had 3 managers, former managers, who had decided that they didn't want to be managers anymore, but they did want to go to work for me. So, and we did a lot of great things, over time. In addition to that, I managed 3 machinists. For some reason, I knew what a machinist had and what he did, and these guys, if you needed something, they could make it. Out of metal, that is. One of the other things I did was I got one of these machines that's numerical controlled machine, and bought it and got it to install. And they were going to work on a device that I had been working on, and they didn't know how to use it. So it lasted about a year or two, and then it went there. But I got into designing storage, disk storage. And in California, they were building disk storage using a iron oxide surface. Well, iron oxide is what you call rust. And the way they made those, they would cut out the disc, polish it, and then spray water on it and expose it to a high temperature, and then it would rust. Well, you could take your pinky on it and scratch across it and destroy the disc, and it was irrecoverable. Well, I had been talking to a Dave Davies from 3M, and at 3M they had developed a disc which was made out of plastic, but it had a track on it. And that track, you can program it several different ways, but the most often used is to have the thing zigzag back and forth, and as it goes, you could follow that motion, and you could get. And that's basically what your CD is today. It's basically that. But I had worked with Dave Davies on that, and one of the guys they wanted to ship that technology to Tucson. Well, one of the guys that was supposed to help transfer to Tucson thought, well, the Japanese are smarter than we are, and what he wanted to do was to move, and he did, move all our technology that we had developed over a period of 2 or 3 years and move it to Japan. So a lot of people think that the Japanese developed the CD. They didn't. We did it here in Rochester, and it was sent by an IBMer from Tucson to Japan, given to them. I asked him one time, what guarantee you have that they won't use it on their own products? Oh, we got it signed up. How long? 1 year. They were producing their own stuff before we were, because IBM just took longer to release a new product. Well, in 1987, I decided to take an early retirement. I was 59 years old. And then I went as a consultant. IBM had several lawsuits. People were suing IBM. They loved to sue IBM because what they did is after, I think like 2 or 3 years, they finally settled with this guy. They gave him, he was a nuisance, okay? He was tying up a team of lawyers, which was costing us around $10 million a year. And he had nothing, when it got down to it, he had himself and a secretary working for him. That's the whole company. And they paid him off like with $12 million just to get him to go away. And the guy had no case at all. In fact, I proved that what case he thought he had was a lie. And what happened is there's a law, a patent law, that if you disclose something publicly, you have 1 year to file for a patent. If you don't file for a patent within 1 year, it becomes public domain. Well, I found in my investigations, I found a letter from this guy to this guy from a lawyer telling him that, hey, you've got to file this patent. Well, the guy fussed around and he didn't file it until I think the 19th or 20th of December. Well, he had demonstrated it to a company and I found the paperwork on it. He had demonstrated to this company in December, and I found paperwork showed him. I had his. When you travel with technology, you have to record it and stuff like that, and he recorded flying to Denver, Colorado, with one of these drives in hand. I think it was the first week in December, but they didn't file until a year and 10 days later.
I want to jump back to a couple military questions. So when you first enlisted, why did you choose the Marines?
Oh, my father was a Marine. My oldest brother was a Marine. It's a family history type thing. Presently today, I have nieces, nephews, and stuff like that. There's probably 10 or 15 of them. Some are officers.
Where did your father and brother serve?
My father was in World War I. He was at St. Mihiel, Muse, Oregon, and I forget. He was on 4 major battles. And my oldest brother was in the 4th Marine Division from the time it was formed until it disbanded. And the 4th Marine Division was on Saipan, Tinian, Roy-Nimar, and Iwo Jima. So
did your brother serve in World War II? Or?
Yeah, those were major battles in World War II. Iwo Jima was probably, the only more bloody one was Okinawa. But Iwo Jima was a key battle. When we were bombing Japan, if anything went wrong, they wouldn't make it back. After we took Iwo Jima, in fact, before we had actually taken it, they could land at Iwo Jima and get serviced and put back in the air. But Iwo Jima was a turning point in the war, which allowed us long-range bombers to bomb Japan. People know about the atomic bombs, but in some senses, the worst thing that happened to Japan was the firebombing. They had this phosphorus, and they would ignite that, and they burned Tokyo, almost burned to the ground, because in Japan everything is built out of bamboo, and all their structure, where people lived, was easily burnable, and that's and the fire bombs. Although in World War II, I had a brother in Florida. He was a B-17 gunner. I had another brother in Luzon. He was in the airborne. Well, my oldest brother was in Marines, and they were all scheduled to land in Japan the first week of 1948. Was it 48? No, not 48. 46. In 1946, they were, no, 40. Yeah, was it 45? Yeah, 46. I don't know. But anyway, they were all scheduled to land before they at a certain time. Well, they dropped the bomb. The Japanese, two of them, the Japanese accepted our terms, which was unconditional surrender. And my one brother was actually in Tokyo on the 3rd of September, the day after they signed the peace treaty. My oldest brother he was on board ship heading for Japan, and they rerouted the ship to Los Angeles. And my other brother was scheduled to fly to Japan from Florida, and he didn't go. So nobody in our family ever criticized dropping the A-bomb. That's the way it was. So.
How many siblings do you have?
I have just one son and one daughter. Or are you talking? Oh, I had 3 older brothers and 3 younger sisters. So you know about all of them.
So military was strong in your family?
Yeah, still is. Except for my family, I have one son and a daughter, and neither one of them were in the military. My son has a problem, and he would never pass the test. When I was working at IBM, I had this one guy working for me. He still lives in Rochester, so I won't mention his name. He was drafted, and he went down, and he had some kind of condition where he had he would generate little particles on his eyelid, and it would interfere with his ability to see. But the guy was brilliant, and he went in, and he was gone less than 2 weeks until they had discharged him because they didn't want somebody with that condition in the service. But he works at the, well, he's probably retired now, but he was working at the clinic, and he and I used to have lunch together every once in a while. They couldn't have children, so they adopted a couple of Korean girls. Yeah, were beautiful little kids.
So what kind of life lessons do you feel like you learned through your military service?
What did I learn from it? Well, I learned to take orders. I've not been very good at taking orders. My boss at IBM one time said that we were walking down the hallway with my boss and his boss. And his boss says, you know, Baxter's the guy, if there's a troop marching by and one is out of step with the rest of them, he's right, they're wrong.